Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tech Leaders Hub. We are coming to you live, unless you're watching the recording, of course. But anyway, welcome to Tech Leaders Hub. My guest today is Søren Bjørnbo Engel, Head of Engineering at Linkfire. Soren, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. Currently at my last week of a 3-week-long summer vacation, so have been enjoying relaxing time with my family. Been able to do a lot of these projects you never get to do on a daily basis. And then in the midst of this heat wave that we have coming across Europe, I'm finally able to catch a bit of a cooler weather these days, so that's pretty good. But apart from that, I'm just very super excited to be spending the next hour together with you and everyone tuning in for today, or listening in, obviously, later on.
Yeah, exactly. I'm really excited about that as well, especially since today we're starting a whole streak of Tech Leaders Hub sessions. We're doing 3 in 3 days. Yours is the first, and tomorrow we're having another one, and the day after another one. But that is in the future. For now, dear watchers and listeners, in my name and Soren's, welcome to Tech Leaders Hub. If this is not your first time watching, you know the drill. Let us know if you can see us and if you can hear us. So we know that the stream is working correctly on a technical level, because this gets turned into a podcast episode later. So the audio especially needs to be good. Leave a comment. Okay. Say hi. Okay. Everything is fine. So talk about your day. How is the weather where you are? Meanwhile, Soren, I wanted to ask you, as people are still kind of joining in, let's give them a few minutes before we get right into the topic for today, which is about, changing the thinking of an entire engineering organization, which I'm very excited to talk about. I wanted to ask you, who do you hope is tuning in, and who do you think will benefit the most from listening to this particular conversation?
That's a good question. So I think the topic can kind of span from everyone sitting being affected by a change in the company. So that would be, on my end, the engineers at all levels. I would also say it very much affects everyone who's leading or taking an active part in the change, as sort of the bearers of the change. So that would be, other leaders tasked with this effort, your managers, people who are especially looking after other people, or even technical leaders, if you will, who are supposed to come in and argue for why a certain change has to happen and be able to kind of steer that in the right course. So I think it can kind of span a bit of a broad spectrum, if you will.
Yeah, right. It's not just about how to actually enact this change, but maybe even how to react to it, how to navigate the change, no matter your position.
Exactly.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so that means a lot of people tuning in will get some value, or a lot of value, from this session. Meanwhile, we've got some comments coming in that all is good on LinkedIn. Thank you for Justina and Jasper saying, yep, all good. Thank you, Jasper. Is it Jesper? Just correct me in the comments if I mispronounce it. Anyway, thank you for letting us know. And since we know that the audio and video are working correctly, I can get to the traditional Tech Leaders Hub question then, because we like to start with something of value before we get into into your bio, your background, and then get into more value for the readers. Soren, you mentioned you listened to some of the previous episodes, so you know what's coming next. I'm going to ask you the traditional question, which is, what is your number one tip for tech leaders?
All right. Yeah. Nah, I kind of had that coming. But it's awesome. So I've been thinking a bit about it also in terms of what we'll be discussing today. And I think one of the things, and this might come out as a little bit of a broken record to some maybe, but I tend to really advocate for saying there is not really that silver bullet. It doesn't exist. It's a phantom. I think it comes out in a way that it doesn't really exist when it comes to finding a solution to the problems we often have to solve inside our industry. And it doesn't come out in the way that we want to be able to organize around and be able to deliver on those solutions. And definitely, and I would say even more especially, it doesn't really hold true when it comes to, making anything true for those people that we end up putting into that environment that we want to have all of this happen within. So my tip here would be that while you might have some ideas or some experience in the past that you can lean towards, which you always do, by the way, on how to approach a certain scenario, I would always say that you should carefully assess the challenge that you have to solve, and then evaluate all open options, and keeping in mind that you should keep all options open, and then decide afterward which one is the best one that solves the problem you have to get solved. And obviously, this is also true when it comes to driving a change management effort, which, I'm looking forward to talking much more about.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you for sharing that tip. You know what this brings to my mind is I think some people fall into the trap of they manage to make something work at a previous organization, like, a strategy, or, maybe they manage to change. And then they go into a new organization trying to do the same. And like you said, there's no silver bullet. Like, it doesn't fit exactly the new context. And you have to, even though you think you found something that works, you need to find something that works for this particular case. Am I understanding that right?
Yeah, precisely. I think something I've at least seen is that, like you say, I mean, you should not always shoehorn everything in, right? Just because it works in one
Mm,
case, you don't need to make it work in the same case in a different company, especially also when it comes to the people side of things. Because as you probably know, within companies, I mean, like, there are always a different culture, different people
mm,
who might react
mm,
to this differently. One thing is the software solution that you think might be fitting. And for some of these things, yes, there are best practices that you can adopt and implement, but yeah, you should just always be careful not trying to pigeonhole yourself up in some way and say this is the only way of doing things, because then you will probably be looking for more trouble than you're interested in at the end of the day.
exactly. So it's almost like you have to meet the organization halfway between kind of your vision, your previous experience, and what the culture is actually like at the new place. So thank you so much for the tip. That makes a lot of sense. Uh, and watchers and listeners, remember, if you have any questions about this or anything else, Soren says, leave them in the comments. And I should say the QA is continuous, so you don't have to wait for the end of the session to ask your questions, just so you know. Uh, Meanwhile, let's go a little bit then into your background, Soren. I wanted to ask you, about the work that you've done, either for Linkfire or previous organizations. What is it about your background that kind of connects to the conversation that we've got here at hand? If we're talking change management, obviously it might be about the changes kind of in your past, but anything that seems relevant, I'm sure the watchers and listeners would love to hear about.
Oh, that's a good question. So I think probably how I can tie this back, because I also remember when we were brainstorming different topics and I brought this up, is obviously because it's something that resonates quite well with both something I find quite interesting to do in places I work, is to kind of, you know, be part of making changes that hopefully at the end of the day make people's life feel a little bit better than where they
Hmm.
were originally. And obviously also because I've had some experiences in my own career where I've both been, I would probably say, sitting at both sides of the table, both being well, some would probably call it a victim of somebody's endeavor to make a change,
Okay.
and also sitting at the end of the steering wheel, being the person who was actually tasked to do a larger piece of the change, which is where you find yourself somehow always thinking that you were an ungrateful person when somebody else was trying to do that with you, because you were
Yeah.
not seeing how big an effort it actually is.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think that's yes, yeah, I think that's probably where I'm coming from with this, really.
Okay. And for the people who might be hearing of Linkfire, for example, for the first time, do you want to say, a few words about the organization you're in right now and what you're doing there? I mean, head of engineering, obviously, but that can mean a lot of different things, right?
It can. I mean, like, the titles are quite inflated these days, so it's more about what you actually do than what your title is, really. But sure, I can just share a few words on what we do, and obviously what my stake in this is all of this. So I mean, so Linkfire is basically on a mission to empower entertainment discovery everywhere. So in short, that means that we optimize and drive streams, we increase ticket sales and recommend audio content to billions of fans and listeners on a global scale. So, and one of the things we have here is our SaaS marketing platform that basically transform music marketing. And now we are on this journey to build a global recommendation network for audio entertainment discovery to connect even more fans and listeners to the content they love. So I would say if we look at our customers, we have customers and partners that are including most of the artists that you would find on Billboard's annual Hot 100. So that's a chart that ranks the best performing singles in the US. We work with all the major record labels, music labels you have out there, global audio and music streaming services, and obviously also social media apps and media publishers. So a bit of a pretty well-rounded product suite, if you will. In terms of my role as the head of engineering, I am currently accountable and responsible, obviously, for the engineering organization's health, growth, and delivery. On a day-to-day basis, I work quite closely with our executive team to agree on the goals and priorities we have as a business. And then I work even closer with my engineering organization in order to actually deliver on those and realize those ideas. Then I'm obviously also being responsible for building a highly efficient engineering organization. And I make sure that our key projects are structured well and delivered on time, all of that. And then I also make sure that my teams, they can do their best to deliver the best results in a fast-paced environment where my focus is constantly to have continuous improvement, to make sure that we do things as smart as possible as we can, but also making sure that we have fun while doing it. That's really my philosophy.
Yeah, I like that last part, having fun while doing it. A lot of people might kind of neglect to include that, but I think that's kind of the oil that really greases the engine sometimes, you know?
Indeed, I think it's quite often that you see that some mindset can be that you just want to rush to reach the goal, but then I mean, my view on that is that I mean, obviously the goal is quite important, but the journey is even more important, because if you if you don't have a good run reaching the goal, then I mean, yeah, you'll probably not have that many runs to reach the goals in the longer run, right?
Yeah, and I wanted to also mention about the previous part about Linkfire. When we were having the initial conversation before this, one thing that kind of got me excited about Linkfire is that it's an app, a product that I myself might end up using one day. I play with a band, and it seems like you guys have this solution where you can hype up songs before they go out. It's like a catalog of links, like for your band, for example, to kind of build that hype before something releases, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's part of probably what you've seen if you go into linkfire.com, and you can sort of see a demo of our product. That's typically the marketing platform you would see here, where, like, say, Jakub, you have the entire, let's say, life cycle around getting a release out into your fans, right? Where you can schedule everything. You can set up an entire campaign, which streaming services you want to get it out to, and then actually monitor how's the traction going across these different streams, and stuff like that. So probably if you go into many of the artist names on something like Instagram and stuff like that, a lot of the links that you can see that is kind of leading you over to the music is typically actually coming from our platform.
It's a Linkfire link. I love that.
Indeed.
I think that makes it really concrete in the listeners' minds there. And anything that supports, the music industry or independent artists is something I wholly support. So, all right. So that's about Linkfire. Obviously, you can go to linkfire.com to find out more. Not now, though. We're still proceeding with our session. For now, let's get right into it then. Let's talk about change management and the topic that we have for our session today. I think it would be good to maybe start with laying a little bit of the groundwork of what we're going to be talking about here. So when you say change management, which is, I think, a term that can be very broadly understood. So what do we mean in the context of this conversation when we say change management?
Got it. No, I think that's a really good starting point. So let me try and see how I can sort of angle into it, because I have a similar sort of like way of structuring it in my mind. So I think the way I would probably start off from saying it is that, when I mean change management, it's really about, changing the way that people are thinking and get the support, and then further on, championing that idea, and then get it actually implemented. You can also say, how do you get people to support an idea, which in some cases you're the only person who are able to see that this is the right way forward. That's another way of viewing it, really, right? And to me, I think maybe the first thing to say here is that change is really hard. It's not an easy thing. It's actually damn hard if you think about it, because mostly it goes all the way back into how we as humans are DNA coded, because we are creatures of habit. Nobody really likes to change at the end of the day, right? If I told you, yeah, look, tomorrow you have to run to work instead of taking the bus because that's just the way it is, you'd probably also be scratching your head saying, well, are you sure that has to happen?
But I don't have any running shoes,
Exactly right. And I think it's interesting in technology, because as a matter of fact, there's actually, and quite often what you want to have here is that there's probably a new technology coming in or something you want to try, and then technology is there to aid us in our day-to-day basis, and then we as people who are working with technology should find it easy or even lucrative to actually take on new technology and work with it, you would imagine, right? But as a matter of fact, a lot of technology change initiatives actually fail also in tech, and that's typically, in my view, because often the goals of why you want to introduce a change are not very well defined. They might also be very poorly communicated to the people who might be affected by this. And then the consequence here is really that it ends up confusing and frustrates your employees. So the outcome of that is really that instead of having an adoption, you end up having resistance. And then resistance ultimately leads to misalignment across your own team, peer teams, whole departments, and then obviously the entire company at the end. And then you end up having this situation where that seed you wanted to plant actually ends up having a lot of competing interest without really having a common goal. So
Right, and instead of, to me, it feels like instead of kind of going from one equilibrium that kind of works to going to another that's much better and also works, you end up in this kind of halfway point where in my own experiences it's been like half the organization implemented the change, the other half is already on the old is still on the old system, for example, and that can be really frustrating. So I want to get into all of these issues a little bit later. But still trying to kind of define change management, I think you definitely gave us kind of a general idea. But specifically in the context of technical leadership, what do you think are kind of the classic examples of changes that would kind of prompt this change management process? What are some typical cases?
I think a really good example of that could be, I actually thought about this as well, is that some years back when microservices was the hot thing that kind of came about as a disruptive change in the way we were envisioning how we would build our technologies or our systems that we would ship. The technology alone made a lot of promises in terms of what you could gain. And indeed, today it is a very well adopted, I think, I would even probably go to the length of saying the standard of how you would probably implement things in one shape or the other. But I think one of the things that was maybe forgotten, and this is just one example of a technology change, but is that technology and the people using it and the way they're using it is really something that goes hand in hand. So often what I've seen is that when you want to introduce a new change as a technology that you bring in, you really have to make sure that you bring people on board and you understand the consequences of what the technology might have of an impact on the people being affected by that.
Yeah, so that really brings to my mind the conversation that we had, before the stream when we were brainstorming kind of the topic to bring up. There was one thing that you said during that conversation that I wanted to kind of unpack here. You mentioned, because, as I understand it from the perspective of a person that's not maybe technical, but speaks with a lot of technical people, is that microservices is an opposite approach to having a monolithic structure. And specifically what you mentioned, stepping outside of the tech part for a moment, is that there aren't just monolithic systems in terms of code, there are also monolithic teams, and it's kind of the team also reflects the kind of the code in that sense. So I think a lot of the listeners may have heard of monolithic code, but what about monolithic teams? What does that mean? And because I feel like that's kind of the starting point of this change, so could you try and define that?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. So I think if we go a bit back in time, and probably there are still some companies who are still very much in this mode, I I think most companies often start out at a certain point being a very small company, few people who starts building something. It's one team, it's one product, it's one code base, right? As you start to evolve at a certain point, you kind of, you build on top of the product, it gets bigger and bigger. And then the team obviously also grows and gets bigger because you are successful, hopefully, and then you start growing. Then at a certain point, you kind of find yourself maybe having not so much wiggle room to make changes, because making a change in one place might actually make a change in another place. And a lot of that ties back to how the teams have originally been chatting and working as a team, because that one team is still seeing themselves as one team, although you try to maybe say, right, instead of having one big team of maybe 20 engineers and specialists across that field, then you maybe slice them up into three, fictive teams that are not really teams, because they are just, like logically grouped to work on something, but they still all need to communicate back and forth. And that's what you will end up ultimately seeing in the way that the code is being built. And that also comes out in a different way when it comes to how you actually deliver your code, because everyone has to work in alignment when it comes to, if you have to ship the feature, you need to check with, like John from this team, Pete from the other team, like, can we give a go for this, or is anything still there? And then it becomes clunky, and then obviously, you're not so nimble and you can't really move fast, right? And this is something that was very true when this concept of microservices came in again, which at that point wasn't quite new, in the sense that, it was a different take on building a distributed system, but it was a different take also on understanding how you needed to basically change your organization to make sure that the two things came hand in hand. And for those of you listening in, and also you, Jakub, I don't know if you've ever heard about this concept of Conway's Law, but essentially this states that teams tend to design software that resembles how their organizational structure looks like. So if you have been used to working in a way where it was very top down, very, you need everyone on board, then the software will kind of reflect that.
Yeah.
So as you can imagine, if you try to break free from that, either by changing the people and the way you work or the technology, there'll be friction. That's sort of what the Conway's Law tells us.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that completely. So I really want to dig into kind of the how of this change, right? But I'm still in my mind at this beginning phase of, we're thinking of initiating this whole change management process, and I can see the potential pitfalls. I can see kind of the challenge that we're looking at here, that there's not only the structure of the code, but the structure of the teams, and both are kind of aligned, and you'll be messing with both, right? If you're thinking of introducing microservices. So the question that popped in my mind as I was thinking about it just now is, what needs to be true about a change to make this whole effort worth it? When you're thinking of, okay, maybe I should initiate this change management process, maybe I should hold off on this, how do you make that decision that actually we should shake things up and this is the time to do it?
I think that's where I would say I've tried to sort of think about, like, what are the steps to be involved in terms of making a larger change. And what I've seen working is that there are basically 5 steps. And one of the first steps there being, and then we can probably dive into the other ones as we go along here. But one of the first things, as I said, is that for people to buy into your idea, you first have to set and communicate very clear goals, which means that precisely define and align what are the intended goals you want to achieve that should be aligned with the goals of your company. So that means, first of all, you have to have a very well articulated case that demonstrates, what you want to do, how you want to get there, and have determination that you want to actually complete that. And that could be, for instance, that maybe you want to improve your customer experience. Maybe you want to reduce the time to market, which is, by the way, one of the huge selling points of why you wanted to go into, maybe microservice being one of the, let's say, accelerators there. But it could also be you want to make a more future-proof company in the longer run, right? Where again, a technology change can also be a fuel there. The important bit is that once those goals are defined and they align with what you want to do as a company, then they should clearly communicate that there is a need for change. If you don't have that, it's the same as you don't have a business case, and then there is no intent for you to go ahead with doing anything, really.
Okay. Yeah, I love that analogy because it really shows kind of the magnitude of the challenge and how important this first step is. It's almost as if you don't have a business case for a startup. I love that we phrase that. So you mentioned, I'm taking these short notes as I go along. I really want to refer back to what you said. You mentioned that, for example, this might be, the goal in mind might be improving customer experience. It might be improving time to market. Both of these feel like business metrics that would speak to the highest level in terms of, yes, we want to improve that. That's kind of on our scoreboard, so to speak.
Yeah.
But the third thing you mentioned was being more future proof. And I feel like that's a little bit harder to tie back to the business metrics that you mentioned before. So how would you explain future proof to somebody who's maybe in the C-suite, maybe not technical, right, to still bring them on board with this change?
So I think one of the things that I've at least seen is a consequence of making a technology change, like, again, this concept of moving into microservices, is that first off, you have to keep an eye out for, in the future, what can you basically hire for, and what is the talent, let's say, what is the talent mass at that point? What are they looking at doing in their own career? And if you are at a certain level in your company where you're still stuck with the way of working that you used to do 10 years ago, then at a certain point in time, you can say the talent will be depleted. Or you have to find somebody that you have to pay a lot more, maybe to do something that they may not really want to do, right? So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it could also be, like, technology changes can mean many different things, but it could also be, like, let's say that you work with a platform that is slowly getting deprecated, and that platform has been scattered across every product you've ever built. In a year from now, that platform will be deprecated. Then you need to make sure that you can quite well articulate this to senior management that while you have to deliver features, this is also a burning platform that you're standing on, that unless you do something, then ultimately you will just not have anything you can sustain in the long run.
Burning platform. I love that. The word platform gets used a lot. I feel like it's lost its punch, right? But when we call it a burning platform, that puts a picture in my mind. It sure does.
It's like a
So I
raft
like what
where
you're saying.
somebody is like cutting the ropes, right? Eventually it will just
Yeah.
deteriorate as you sit on it, right?
Yeah, it's gonna fall apart right under our feet, and then the sharks are gonna eat us. Okay.
Well, you added that to that, but indeed.
Just like sharks. Okay. I like that, and I like it, especially that it shows it's such an interconnected system. You say future proofing, but it's also about talent retention at the end of the day. Because, for example, tech talent might want to work in a microservices kind of way, and they don't want to join a monolithic organization that's kind of stuck in the past. I didn't think of it that way, so I'm glad you added that here. So you mentioned 5 steps. I love that. I love structure, obviously. We're going to get to step 2 next. But before that, I just wanted to ask one more question about kind of the nitty gritty of communicating these goals. How exactly do you do it? Is it like a meeting, a speech? Is it a slide deck? Do you do it to the C-suite first, or do you first talk with your immediate team? What can you tell me here from your experience?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things to it. So, I mean, well, if we start with the way I would recommend you roll this out, I would say you need to have a kickoff communication with senior management involved there, because, I mean, their presence and their support means everything. If you don't have support from top down, I think you can do grassroots movements where you work your way up. But if you don't have support from top down, it's going to be a bit of an like an uphill climb, if you will.
Okay.
So I would definitely say that there has to be communication from top down that clearly explains the need for making this change. And then you need to provide an overview of how that adoption process would look like, and then place some emphasis, obviously, on what is the positive impact of making this change, so that everyone in the company will understand why we're doing this. Okay, it is to make our lives easier, not to make it more hard or more difficult to work within. There is actually a point to it. And
Yeah.
I would say the way that, depending on who does this originally, let's say that you are sitting a bit, let's say, lower than obviously being in C-suite, and you need to convince C-suite that what you have here is a really good idea, you can still do that. And then I think what you do have to do there is instead do a bit of crawling around your network inside your company, starting off with, like pitching the ideas to close peers, getting feedback, seeing if there is, like any grounds for further advancements. If there is, try and get, always get support from your manager, and make sure that the manager is also championing your idea across the board.
Right.
And if it's a healthy organization you're part of, eventually this will spin up to the higher powers. And then if you made a good enough business case, it should be pretty obvious that, this is a win for the company.
Okay, so from what I've heard thus far, it's important to get your kind of immediate manager involved. It's important to get feedback from your peers. On the one hand, it allows them to challenge it. It also allows them to feel like it's more collaborative, right? Not just, you came with this idea. And then after that, it seems important to start talking with the C-suite. That I kind of get that right.
Exactly. And I think, it's definitely also, I mean, like one thing you mentioned there, I think is super important to emphasize, is this engaging everyone in the decision-making process, because being transparent about what you're doing, getting people's feedback, making sure that they can even contribute to that change maybe themselves, is actually a really good way to make sure that by incorporating their feedback, you also start to somehow get them to get more ownership early on. And then what I've seen then is that this is a huge catalyst for then making sure that they will help you later on drive the adoption. And that's very important, because again, a change is not something you do on your own. This is a hugely collective effort that you want as many individuals involved in, who can make sure that, what you want to do can be carried along and then supported across the board.
All right, very, very interesting. This is actually bringing to mind even some of my own projects where I think I could use a little bit more of this collaborative approach. But never mind, I'll do that after the call. All right, so so let's say that was kind of step 1 out of 5, right? Being mindful of the time, we should probably move to the second step. So step 1 was, I got it noted down as set and communicate clear goals. And I should say, watchers and listeners, if you have questions about step 1 or stage 1, whatever, ask them. Okay, just go ahead and ask them any kind of more nitty gritty details that you might out of Soren. Go ahead, don't hesitate. Meanwhile, we're gonna move on just to try and cover all of the material. So step 1 of this change is to set and communicate clear goals. What is step 2?
The next step is to get a team in order who will be in charge of leading the change. And that is important, because what you want to do is really a simple, you can kind of call it like a change management team. I would not call it that, obviously, but that's just for the sake of at least conceptually understanding what this team is supposed to do. Who will have the right combination of both skills and personalities, and also influence inside your company. And this is where you would tap into those who really, like have those leadership skills needed, understand and can support the need for that change. So that would probably also be the people that you have sort of lobbied your idea to early on, and other influential people inside the company. And they should also be in a position to actually be able to relate to that change, and then reassure others that this is a change that has to happen. And then by having this team, and then by spreading this team out, then you will ultimately get to a point where you will have horizontally responsibilities across the different departments that are connected to this change.
Okay.
You'll keep them engaged, you'll keep them productive, and then by having this team, they will also be the ones who can then take the initial heat when it comes to changing in the situations that is coming from whenever you do a change. they are willing to learn from setbacks, something that obviously we should always be, but they are particularly somebody who's very used to and keen on doing that. And then obviously also adjusting to those changes, because again, we are working here with people, processes, tech all together. So yeah, you need to keep a lot of balls up in the air.
The part that I particularly like about it is to spread the work of taking the heat here. It's like there's gonna be resistance. It should not fall all on one person because it's easy to get discouraged that way. You need a team that will handle it.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think we all see that every day, right? No matter if it's change, it's a bigger change or not, you're just somebody that you can go back to, use as a soundboard, echo out different things into a smaller group, and then learn from, well, how does this change came across here versus here? What can we learn? Why did this work well here and not so much here? What do we need to change? So I think it's really important, and also because they will ultimately be the ones who keep the fire lit throughout the entire journey, if you will, right? That's the sole responsibility of this team as well.
Exactly. Okay. Well, I love that as a general point, but now I'm gonna ask a few nitty-gritty questions here as well. Tell me about the composition of this team. What kind of levels? What kind of departments? Generally speaking, like we mentioned, every organization is different. But when you envision this team, who might be on there? How big is the team? Even let's start with there.
Yeah, so I think what I've seen working in the past is that I would typically have a team of well no more than 10 people, because that's also getting too big. So I would probably say something maybe half of that, somewhat around those lines. Depending on how many departments you want to have, but normally I would say, because I tend to say when you also do this, you would also have cross-team collaboration, even cross-department collaboration. So I would involve obviously everyone from engineering, product management, support, marketing, commercial folks, what have you. Then get representatives in there who are both, looking after the people side interests, who can understand how this change impacts the actual, let's say, more emotional side of people's mind. You would also want to have somebody who can understand what does this have of an impact on the way we are doing our work, somebody who's a bit more process oriented. And then you also want to have somebody who can understand what this means from a technology change perspective, in case something is both working and not working. And you would want to have somebody who is obviously, I would not say, it's not because you need to have your most senior people, but you need to have somebody who is at least, well enough mature in their ways of working and thinking so that they can cope with this environment. Meaning that you need to be able to take a lot of heat as a shield from a lot of incoming directions. You need to be able to have a voice so you can come out and actually communicate with people. So probably you don't want to take your most junior people, because that will probably not be a very
Right.
fun exercise for them. But I would say some level of seniority, but you don't need to have the full cavalry rolling in with your most senior people not doing anything but this. I mean, you can also have people who are maybe, let's say, younger in their career, but knows enough about or has the charisma or something like that to be able to work their way through this. Obviously have a diversion in, like age, for instance, because again, people who are a bit older than maybe the young generations have different ways of viewing things. And at the end of the day, we all have to come to a compromise here. So try and get a really diverse group, I would say.
Very interesting. So you mentioned one type of person that might be on the team. You mentioned involving different departments, and I wanted to initially latch on to marketing, but that would be too obvious. Let's say support. Somebody from customer support might be on there. How do you get that person to buy in to what you're doing there? That I imagine they might be thinking like, okay, engineering is trying to make this change. The code is going to be different. Their teams are going to be different. Why would I sit on those meetings? Why would I kind of champion this change? Why should I care? From the perspective of, let's say, customer support here.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, like I said, I mean, like, again, with the good example of the microservice change, if you will, then this is basically something that re-engineers every process, because the product is so radically different than what they were used to do. So from their end, I would say something that I would say to them is that, well, this new way of working actually means for you that we can quickly pinpoint where the issues are. We can quicker resolve them, but in order for you to kind of get that benefit, you have to be part of making a change in the way that you are registering tickets, understanding where in the system we have the let's say the different products living, because maybe for you in the past it was just one big surface where you said
Uh-huh.
like there's a problem in this like top right corner at the screen. Now we have a hugely distributed system, so now you need to know a bit more about like what are the incoming where does the clicks end up in the system, who do you need to connect to, and how do we quickly resolve issues when they actually arise.
Okay. So what is changes in their work, for example, is when they report something, they need to be more precise about who they are reporting it to, so it lands in the right place. Because it's more, I don't want to say fragmented, but maybe more specialized units are involved in this microservices example.
Yeah, and I mean that's obviously one of the. It's both a benefit and and maybe also a bit of a disadvantage in the sense that it does impose a little bit more overhead to understand where should a ticket land up in the end of the day. But I think having that close collaboration
Yeah.
with that overarching, let's say, business domain you work within, it obviously also makes sure that you stay way more connected to everyone involved in making sure that the product being shipped and then supported and all of that is actually well connected, right? Um,
Yeah.
that's why it's important for them to be
Mhm.
very close to the people they work with on a daily basis.
Exactly, because and you put it all in the context of actually you started with a benefit for them, right? And when you report something, it's going to get fixed faster. I feel like that is kind of crucial here to lead with the benefit for them and then explain. But the trade off is going to be this. So I think you answered that question beautifully, actually. And the next thing I wanted to ask about before we move on to step three is how do you structure the work of this team? The thing that comes to my mind, but maybe that's kind of a habit that I've got, is like weekly calls, check in about the status here, maybe start up a new board on your favorite project management software, how to track that work. But is there anything specific, maybe due to the kind of cross functional nature of this team, that would make the management of this project a little bit different? How do you structure the work here?
No, I think what you mentioned there is all good suggestions on how to do it. Basically, I mean, I would definitely what I've seen working quite well, and what I'm also doing today actually, with my cross peers is that I mean, like we have a weekly meeting where we discuss, like what are key initiatives that we're all working on, figuring out, like, are there any blockers that we need to solve in our respective departments? How
Mhm.
do we kind of make sure everyone is moving in the same direction? And then we have a general, let's say, backlog that we all work on, that is, let's say, more high level. And then on my end, then of course, I mean, like to my managers, then it becomes a little bit more obviously concrete, and then even more concrete when it comes down into the individual teams.
Okay.
So there is a nice synergy across the board. But yeah, I think both is definitely needed, both to make sure that we have everything captured in writing in case somebody isn't able to attend, and especially also these days where there's so much work that is async and we're not always on the same point in time. But I
Yeah.
think having that weekly sync, no matter if you then do it async or in sync in person, I think is hugely important just to make sure that there is a check-in point, if you will.
Right. Okay. Okay. Cool. So I'm glad that that kind of aligns here, and I can certainly visualize it. There's a meeting. There's a backlog. I think that's nice and concrete and actionable for the people watching and listening. I will say again, any questions about this, ask them. We're gonna move on to step three in the process. So if one is setting and communicating goals, the second one is creating a team in charge of making this change. What is step three, Soren?
Got it. So the third step is sort of the approach of how you then attack this, if you will. And I
Hmm.
call this like favoring an iterative approach with fast feedback loops. And the idea here is really to favor the iterative process because it prioritizes generating value, gathering feedback, and then allow you to make adjustments in smaller steps in order to deliver the desired result. So, put it in a different way, don't try and do everything at once.
Okay.
Because if you end up doing that, there is a high chance that you're basically going to fail. Too big of a scope, too many things up in the air, it will basically just wear out people at the end. So what I've seen work pretty well is taking a bit of an MVP approach, where you're basically taking a very small thing that you want to test out as an idea, small risks associated, and then you basically start to optimize around that idea. If it's a success, you continue evolving on it. If not, you discard it, and then you kind of rinse repeat. And the benefit here is really that as you experience these quick wins with minimum investment, in turn you also enhance the desire, or fuel even the desire, for having additional changes, because this is again a bit of this, like what you can kind of call like psychologically how we're wired as humans, because when something feels good, you want to continue doing that. On the contrary,
Yeah.
of something that is like hard or annoying to do, you want to avoid it, right? So that's
Right.
like
Yeah.
having these constant small like nudges that this is a good way of moving forward is definitely a really good way of introducing a change, at least what I've seen.
So I'm curious about one thing here. I can imagine making. I'm going back to the example of microservices. I feel like that's constantly in the background here. I can imagine you might take a part of the code base and make it more microservices based, because code is pretty malleable. If you
Mm.
will, it's easy to change. But can you do the same with an organization of people? Can you test a change where it's like, okay, for a few months, actually, we're reorganizing the teams and they're going to be structured in this way. And if it doesn't work, we go back. Is that something that could actually be done? That's something that you've tried?
Sure, yeah, absolutely you can. I mean, it's very much the same. I think I should probably mention that this iterative approach goes for both product and people, if you will.
Okay.
The trick is to start small and then grow. And
Hmm.
then, especially like you say, can you do this with a process of way of working, stuff like that? Absolutely. I mean, you probably want to take maybe something I do want to change, like maybe something fundamental, and then go back to some of the basics around like how do you manage your project? How do you ship your code? How do you do this? How do you review your code or whatever? And then you focus on small individual bits and pieces. And then you make a change gradually one by one. Of course,
Hmm.
when you do that, you really need to make sure that you can both capture and measure the success of a change. Because if you cannot measure it, you cannot really see if
Right.
it has a positive effect or not. So that's
Hmm.
something you should do. But this is something you can definitely do, and you can even do that if you have, like you say, like a spin-off team you do that sits on the sides of the mothership, if you will.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
This team is actually then I mean, you can definitely do this. You just obviously need to make sure that you create the right boundaries between the new piece you do and the old piece you had. The benefit of doing this, to maybe add to that, is that when you get successes like this, and this is especially true when you make a change in a process, or like the work that people are carrying out, or the way they're doing it, like I said, the process, this is a really good showcase that you can use to walk around to other teams saying, look, we said we wanted to do this, we actually managed to do this, this is way better than what we did, and we can prove it. And then you have the
Mhm.
support of the people that actually did it. So this is not you coming and saying, in theory, I think this would be better. You actually have the people who are now being, like the subject to what you wanted to do, who are coming out saying, this is way better. We should all be doing
Okay.
this.
Right, because instead of just a change management team kind of across the organization, you've also got this, for example, new unit that you tested this on, and they say, "Hey, this works." So now you've got a few more people kind of on board the change. I can see how the snowball gets rolling. Uh,
Exactly.
yeah, that's really cool. Okay, I'm trying to fit all of the 5 steps in the time that we've got here, and we've only got like 10 minutes to go, which is in itself kind of. I'm always so surprised by the time. Let's go to step 4 right away. We had this iterative approach with fast feedback loops. How about step number 4? What's next?
Got it. So step 4 is plan for resistance, because
Mhm.
overcoming resistance is absolutely key. And believe me, it will happen. I mean, there is no dispute, it will happen. And if we focus only on, for today's maybe session, on what can happen internally, because there's obviously also external factors to take into account with, customers and all of that. But if we only look at the folks that we have internally, I would say that what I would focus on here to really make sure would ensure that you get internal adoption when you make a change would be a couple of different things. So it would be make sure that you upskill and reskill employees. So that would be creating a knowledge base and training videos, hosting enough meetings to really make sure that people understand why are we doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And again, make sure that there is, a way for them to see that they can actually get on board with what you want them to do. You prep them for that, you support them in that endeavor is super important, and that goes for both whether or not you're an IC or you're a manager, because everyone is being part of that change transformation. The other thing you can do here is reward adopters who are sort of supporting your cause. And there are many different ways you can do that. I mean, like you can use gamification. That's a huge motivational factor for most people. I think, we recently had to look into, improving some of our production readiness. Then, I mean, like we were evaluating different things. And again, like if you make a bit of a game of this in terms of, like scorecards and how well your systems are, like behaving, where you have gaps, looking at other people, like becomes a bit of a, like, I want to get these achievements. That's something that really, like, I think we're all victim of that in one way or the other, right? So I think that's something that I really recommend. Of course, I mean, there are the obvious things like, you can turn into compensation, you can turn into company perks. I mean, like there are different ways you can kind of go about that. But I think, like one thing that is definitely free is the gamification part. And that's quite effective. The other thing is that it's super important to treat this adoption as an ongoing basis. It doesn't start and stop with the fact that you've sort of announced there is a kickoff. Now we will do this, and then we go back into our chairs, and then that's like the end of the day, and then everyone is happy. It's super important that you keep emphasizing and communicate the change, where we're at, what have we done, celebrate successes, and make sure that you train people in what they need to be trained in, and make sure that you encourage everyone to take part of the discussion, and that everything is very transparent. Again, as I said, fourth point also here being inclusive decision making, making sure everyone feels like their opinion is being heard, although they might not always be, the person who takes the decision. At least if people, they feel that they are contributing to it, it's going to be such a better success for everyone.
This brings to my mind a phrase that I heard recently, that you should not aim for consensus, but at least for consent out of the people who might not be entirely on board with the change, but at least they consent to it. On the subject of gamification, what I like about that when I envision it is that it forces you also to be really concrete about the goals here. It's like you can have a vision of like we're adopting microservices or Redis. I think you mentioned here that might be an example, right? That it was Redis. Did I get that right?
I think we may have talked about it at some point. Yeah.
Okay. Whichever change it is, if you make it like a checklist of, okay, you need to, fulfill this and this and this to get that badge, it forces you to think, okay, what does this change look like when it's done, right? For each individual person. I feel like that's hugely beneficial all around, at least when I, envision it.
Exactly.
Right. So I suppose that leaves us with just a little bit of time to talk about that last step, and then we'll be saying our goodbyes. I don't know. Let's go into
so fast.
It does. It really does. Okay, let's finish the structure. So we went through all of these 4 steps. How about step number 5?
Yeah, last one is ensuring continuous improvement. So I would say successful change management really requires an ongoing commitment to make continuous improvement. No doubt about that. And this is required until the very end, where you can sort of see the desired results achieved. And again, this is where the MVP approach is a perfectly well-suited process for this to happen. And like I said, I mean, I would never recommend setting out to redo your entire, let's say, product all at once. That's virtually dooming you from day one. And then instead, take this continuous improvement approach and then iterate and keep iterating until you get to the point where you need to be, because that's really what is giving you minimal disruption. And this goes both in hands with the technology, but also with the organizational people side, really. and make sure you learn from your mistakes. I mean, that's really also what is supposed to be sort of mentioned here, is that a lot of what you're doing when you're doing a change management effort is also you're doing a lot of experimentation that should be understood and appreciated from all levels in the company. And everyone should allow and encourage you to occasionally make mistakes. And when that happens, we're all here to support you and help pick you up again, right? And then learn from that.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, yeah. And I suppose I'm kind of trying to put this together in my head. This continuous improvement, this isn't just, as the change is happening, but you're kind of recognizing that the change, even, maintaining the new equilibrium is going to be work in itself, I suppose. It's like this step never really ends, does it?
No. It's an ongoing effort, I would say.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I like that a lot. And I think continuous improvement in general is something that really often shows up on Tech Leaders Hub. That and feedback loops, I feel like, if I were to point these two threads out, that's something that Tech Leaders should really keep in mind, because a lot of the guests seem to mention it. Anyway, so we're kind of closing to the end of our time. I don't want to go too over time. So watchers and listeners, this is the last call for a question. I can take one question if you submit it very, very soon. Otherwise, Soren, I wanted to ask you, is there anything else for this change management process that you think that was the one thing that really made the difference, that made everything easier? If you were to point out to kind of one thing that really made this process kind of smoother that you would like our watchers and listeners to remember, what would that be?
I think for you personally, if you're in charge of doing a change management, keep in mind that you'll never be able to satisfy everyone, and make your peace with that. Because at the end of the day, if you can get consent but not consensus, as you said, then you're a long way along making a positive change. You will never get everyone on board, but so don't try and aim for that.
Amazing. I like that. That really ties a bow on the whole conversation. Very well then. Thank you for sharing all of that. I'm really glad we managed to kind of fit it within the time. I should start making these longer. Never mind. So I feel like that was really, you took us through the whole process here of this change management effort. I hugely appreciate that, and I hugely appreciate having you on the show. At the end, what we like to do is to give you a little bit of an opportunity to talk about kind of your own things, your own announcements. Do you have anything that our audience should know about? Do you want them to do something? Are you hiring? Should they follow you on LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, maybe? What should the thing be that our watchers and listeners should do?
No, and thank you too for having me. I mean, it's been a pleasure. So really appreciate that as well. No, I would encourage everyone, if they are interested, having any follow-up questions, if you're tuning in later, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn, shoot me an email, whatever is your way of communicating. Be happy to discuss this, share my experiences, be a soundboard if needed. And I think in terms of other ongoing activities, then of course we are obviously also growing as a company, and I would always encourage people, if you are interested in working within technologies inside the entertainment industry and music in particular, keep an eye out for our career website, also on linkedin.com/careers. And shoot me a message if you have any questions about anything you see, or don't quite see anything that matches what you want to do. Always feel free to shoot me a message.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely follow Soren on LinkedIn, follow Linkfire on LinkedIn, and check out their careers and follow them. They're a cool company to follow, in my humble opinion. On the other hand, some people might be meeting SDX Next for the first time through this stream. If so, very happy to meet y'all. SDX Next is the company that brings you Tech Leaders Hub. And what we would like you to remember about us is that we are Europe's largest software development company that specializes in Python. If you're building a Python-based product and you would like to boost your efforts with Python developers, JavaScript developers for the front end, machine learning, DevOps, but also designers, testers, we can help with all of that. And it's not just providing, additional, how should I say this? additional resources, but also consulting, helping you find the best practices and helping you build faster, avoid the common pitfalls. If you need any of that, sdxnext.com is where you can read a lot more about it in a lot more eloquently put. Meanwhile, for more Tech Leaders Hub, just go to techleadershub.com and you can sign up for a newsletter there. You will be informed by email about all upcoming sessions. Just at the beginning of this week, we put out an email that we're going to have 3 Tech Leaders Hub sessions this week. So definitely tune in tomorrow too for our session with Anders Kring from Lunar. You can find that when you go to SDX Next on LinkedIn. On our company page, all of these sessions are kind of listed there in our events section. So do any of those. SDXnext.com, techleadershub.com, SDXnext on LinkedIn, any of those will make me very, very happy. I should say us at SDXnext. Whoops. Anyway, that's it for Tech Leaders Hub for today. The hour really flew by, but Soren, thank you again for being such a gracious guest. And I really do hope we're going to get to have a conversation, soon in the future again for some other occasion. It was great. Any kind of final thoughts for our audience before I click and broadcast?
No, I think it's a good note to end on.
Awesome. All right, everybody, enjoy your day and see you tomorrow for more Tech Leaders Hub. So glad to be able to say that. Yep. Till then. Bye-bye.